Okay, we're live. I'd like to bring us back to chapter 9 of this amazingly difficult and wondrous Maimer Zeh Hayom Tchilas Masecha, 1981. So we ended the class yesterday with a review of the difference between Malchus and the other Spheros, right, in their source. Ultimately, we're trying to understand that the whole uniqueness of Rosh Hashanah is that we're drawing down this inyan of Zeh Hayom Techilas Masecha, which is inyan of Zeh, right? And we said that in order to do so, we have to understand that what we're capturing here with this, with bringing out the sphere of Malchus, because we said ultimately this level of Zeh, which is unique and didn't exist in the previous days of creation, is an aspect of God which could only be elicited on Rosh Hashanah. So we made a distinction between two different aspects. Everybody knows that the Binyan HaMalchus, right? That the sphere of Malchus inside of Hashem gets built over these 10 days that we're in right now. So for example, there's 10 different levels of the sphere of Malchus, and that's why there's 10 days of Tshuva. Someone was asking me before, like, why we're still learning Rosh Hashanah Maimer. And the idea is that because it's really 10 days of Rosh Hashanah. Yom Kippur is also called Rosh Hashanah in the Pasuk. And it's because the whole idea of Rosh Hashanah is building the sphere of Malchus to come out of Hashem. And since the sphere itself has 10 parts, each day brings out the fullness of this majesty of Hashem. So we asked ourselves a question, what is Malchus? And most of the Maimarim explain Malchus is the idea of bringing the world into existence, something from nothing, which is a pretty big deal. But then we asked, if that's the case, then it really was already came out on the 25th of Elul, because the world already came into existence, something from nothing. So we started to explain there's two aspects of Malchus, right? There's the aspect of Malchus, which is its lower function, which is its speech, which is its creative function of creating the world, something from nothing. And that did come out on the 25th of Elul. When we say Zeh Yom Techilas Masecha, then on Rosh Hashanah it's called a day of Zeh, which means a higher level of divinity than was put into the worlds. So there's an aspect of Malchus which is beyond its faculty of speech, which is the content of the actual Malucha of Malchus. In other words, the fact that Hashem wants to be a king, not just that he speaks. And we said this idea that Hashem wants to be a king, that does come out uniquely on Rosh Hashanah. And then we started to explain the difference between Malchus and the other Spheros in general, and why it's unique. And we said a bunch of things. Let's run through them real quick. Malchus is different in its source, in its mohus, and ofen or metzias hamahus, in its hisorus and ofen hisorus, and its his galus and ofen his galus. I'm surprised I remembered it myself. But let's go through it. What's the difference in Malchus and its source from the other spheros? It comes from what level? Reisha de lo yisyada, the unknowable head. The other spheros come from? Outside of Keter. The external part of Keter, which is called? Erich pin. What's the difference in its mahus? It's just a point. Even in its source, the other spheros are called 9 lights, which means even in their origin, there's already a measure of revelation associated with their identity, even though, as we said yesterday, their identity, in their source, nothing is really at a state of revelation yet. That's the idea that it's inside of source. But even in the source, it's like sort of holding a space of being 9 lights of revelation. Whereas Malchus in Radla, the Reish de lo Yisyada, the unknowable head, it's not in a state of revelation. It's a point which shows that it's an absence of any existence whatsoever.
How exactly do you define Mahusa?
Mahus means it comes from the word mahu. What is it? Right? So it's basically its identity, what it is, right? And then we said also ofen umetzius mahusa, which is sort of came together with mahus. It means how does that mahus come out? It also comes out as a point. In other words, it also, when it shows itself from the essence, it doesn't come out as light. It comes out as an absence, as we're going to see. Hey, all right. Thank you. Then we have its arousal. How is it aroused? It has to be aroused by the other, as opposed to being self-aroused, right? In other words, it won't come out of its deep, deep hiding place unless something summons it, whereas the other 9 lights, they're willing to shine on their own, right? They can just get excited and shine. Nothing has to pull them out of their sort of deep-seated concealment. And therefore, the way that they're aroused is also has to be done by something that is interesting enough to the one being aroused to actually get it to be aroused. So the ofen hisorusa, the manner that it's aroused, is also different. How? The radla, the source of malchus, has to be aroused by something which is be'erich, comparatively on the same level, right, as the source. As opposed to, for example, the other 9 spheros, they can be, since they come out and arouse themselves to come out, they don't have to come out and be aroused to come out on people, right? They can come out on animals or on lower elements of life, kindness and mercy, etc., because they come solely from Hashem. It doesn't require another person to bring them out, and therefore the place that they go and reveal themselves to is not necessarily specifically on the subjects that would arouse kingship. You guys remembering this from yesterday? And then the revelation and the manner of the revelation is similar to what we said before, that when it comes out, it also comes out similar to its source, which is a point, an unrevealed thing. What does that do? It creates a space and a distance type of relationship between the mashpi and the makabel, as opposed to a close type of relationship. How do we explain this? The best mashal is simply a king, right? When the king has a relationship with you as a king, what that relationship makes you feel like is that you're infinitely distant from him. It creates space and awe between the levels that you're on. So you know less and less about him, the more and more he reveals his kingship to you. Because that's the idea of a king, is that he's head and shoulders above you. And again, this is what's going on in the 10 days of tshuva. There's more distance. If he's revealing more of his malchus, we're having a greater fear of awe, a greater feeling of awe, and a greater fear, and a greater distance, like, who is this mighty, mighty God? And that's why it sort of leads up to this experience of Yom Kippur, which is the full revelation of Hashem's kingship ultimately, which is an ultimate distant relationship. Again, it doesn't mean it's interested, right? It doesn't mean it's sort of apathetic in the state of distance. It's having a relationship with you. Just the relationship is one that creates distance, as opposed to sort of coming towards you and explaining himself to you, or showing you emotion. Those other spheros, which are not the malchus level, they create a sort of closer relationship where you're finding something out about this individual, not being made to experience a distance. You with me on that? All right, so we're going to actually just repeat that inside real quick, run through those differences, not from what we did yesterday, but moving forward. And here, let's take it from inside. So this is a bit of a chiddush. We haven't been inside this mimer in about a week. So, if you go, the last word on the line, which is about 10 lines up from the bottom of the paragraph of Tess, is vehine, and it's the last word, and it comes right after a period. I'll just give you a second to find that. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. It's 11, 12 lines up from the bottom. You got it? Okay. So he says, hine. You got it? Hine hasiba lekol hachilukim elu. The difference because for all these differences between malchus and the other spheros, shbein midos and malchus, the shars hamidos, hu achiluk shebeinehem b'shorsham. All those other differences that we mentioned are all really based on the fact that they have this different source. If you can get your head around this idea of the difference between radla, the unknowable head, and the erech anpin, the long faces, or the external part of Kesser, then all these other differences will flow from there. To the Yosh Shorash Malchus Hu Radla, since it comes from Radla, and Bechinas Radla, who lo rak Reisha de lo Yisyada, Elagam Reisha de lo Yada, and Radla, this level is not just a head that cannot be known in the future, but it's a head also, he explains, that was never known. And if you look at footnote 96, we mentioned this before, just drop down to the middle of footnote 96, it says, V'zel Lashono, after that number 19, Da hu Reisha de lav Reisha, de lav Reisha, asher sham chevyon oz ha'atzmus, there it's concealed in this head, which means sort of in this state of godly source, which is called chevyon oz ha'atzmus. It's sort of like the place of the true strength of the essence. Hu atzmo enu masig mashi bo. We got excited about this now for the third time. God Himself does not know what's there. V'zeu perish de lo yada v'lo yis yada. He didn't know, and it's called the unknowable, but also called the never known. Ma dahavi b'rei shada. What's found in this head? And how would we relate to this concept that God could have something that he doesn't know about? Because again, if you're talking about knowing about it, you're already in the realm of revelation, right? Something that can be known is something that in principle is a knowable item. Whereas what we're saying here is just like in an example of your own soul, there's revelations of your soul that kind of come ad infinitum. You can just continue to bring forth infinite, qualities from your own soul. But that thing which is your soul, you never really know what it is. And so, because it's the source of all this knowledge, right? And so it is with Hashem. There's an aspect of Hashem which is just his essential being, which you can try to know it, right? And when you'll bring out revelation from it, we spoke about this last time, it will go and reveal itself infinitely. Remember the spoon conversation, right? That no matter how much you try to define it, you'll just never get to the end of its description, right? But since it's God, the descriptions will literally try forever, and that's where infinity comes from, right? Because you asked the question, if God can't know, aren't you tampering with his infinity? And I said, on the opposite is true, right? The reason there is such a thing called infinity is because there's an infinite attempt by God himself, so to speak, to plumb to the depths of what this unknowable reality is. And because it's truly unknowable, it has no end, right? It's not a point which can be sort of like defined or measured at some level. Therefore, the ability to try to define it goes on literally forever. If it had some knowable reality to it in this unknowable head, then there wouldn't be infinity at all. The concept of infinity would not sort of get born. Because infinity is nothing other than the God expressing that which cannot be known. And since it's an absence of a being at that essential state, therefore its attempt goes on forever. Right? So don't get too excited about the fact that God is so infinitely great inside of himself that it's not capturable. And therefore it's called unknowable. Fine.
So the Binyan Malchus, that's the unknowable point?
The most internal aspect which God has, which is unknowable at this point, that's what he's going to actually release. Somehow it's going to come out. Now when it comes out, it doesn't come out like all the other infinite things. It comes out in a unique way. And that's the source of all those other differences we said, right? That it has a different way of being summoned, and it has a different aspect of revelation. It comes out and makes a distance between everything. That's what he's trying to say. If you understand its difference in its root, you understand all the other differences. Right? Because it's unknowable, she'enum mahus yudua gam la'atzmu, it's not back inside. It's not in a knowable mahus of a mahu, right? What is it, even to himself? L'chein gam kamo sheba b'chinas hamshacha. Therefore, even when it comes out, muhusa umetzias mahus. Remember, this was the second distinction we said. What is it and how it comes out? He b'chinas lo metzias, right? Everything else, when it comes to shine from that level of nothingness, it shines itself as 9 lights, and it reveals some level of infinity. But then none of those things are actually tapping into revealing the true state of nothingness. Those things are attempts to describe that true state of nothingness. Therefore, they come out differently as lights, right? You can call them 9 lights, you can call them infinite attempts to make light. But the point is, as long as you're in the realm of light, they're only attempting to reveal the true state of nothingness, but they don't. If you want to reveal the true state of nothingness as it is, it doesn't come out as light, it comes out as a non-existent entity, because it shows its true self, right? And this is the idea that even when it comes in a state of hamshacha, so let me try and explain. This level can reveal itself in 2 ways, so to speak. It either reveals itself in a way where it's not actually revealing itself. It's just attempting to show you, rays of revelation from it. It's like a rays from the sun. When you're getting the rays from the sun, you're not actually getting a revelation of the sun itself. Or it can actually show you the sun itself, right? Which, when you see the sun itself, it doesn't look like light, right? The core of, light is what comes outside of the sun. If you would see the core of the sun revealed to you, you wouldn't see light. You'd see this. You'd see some absence of ability to even show itself. Am I making this clear? You sure?
this.
That's it.
It just kind of links out once you do that.
Yes, it reveals the level of unrevealableness. That's truly called revealing the source. And therefore, because of it's at this level, in order for that to happen, what gets such a thing to come out? Right? It's not interested in coming out, right? What comes out naturally is the 9 lights. Yeah, it'll show you itself to you all day long. Not itself though, because it doesn't even know about itself. Right? So if you're going to sort of knock on its door and say, yeah, but I want to see you, it's like it has to say, oh, well, who's asking? Right? And this, therefore, it has to come from the outside in order to be summoned. And therefore, not just anyone can summon. The manner of its being aroused and the revelation itself has to be from what we call a zulas hashayich, which means not just any old other, but an other which has the ability to actually, bring forth the feeling of kingship from Hashem. Something that can actually make the infinite distance of this entity feel like it's been triggered. Right? Shebe'er chadafka, which in other words, like the idea of a subject which is worthy of reigning over. Hainu de kol amidos. So now, all the midos, Mekevan she'etzem hamida v'gam hisorduse hima adam atzmos, going back to all the other midos, since the essential quality and also its arousal, it can come from the person himself, right? In other words, I have these parts of myself that I know about, and therefore I can sort of reveal them at will. For example, like kindness, mercy, you can arouse these qualities inside of yourself, chesed and rachamim, without another person being there. And therefore it doesn't really matter, and it doesn't hold back my midos of mercy and love based on the one that I'm having mercy and love for. In other words, he is insignificant. My mercy and love can come out for any reason because nothing's making them come out based on its merits. Yeah?
Does ma'akev mean matter?
No, it doesn't. Ma'akev means to hold it back. Right? So in other words, it comes out without the other person having to do it, and therefore it doesn't hold it back, the thing that you're having chesed for. In other words, the thing that I'm having chesed for cannot stop my chesed from coming out. Whereas the thing that I'm having, I'm reigning over, totally can stop my sphere of malchus from coming out, because as we've said many times in a way of joke, I cannot feel a king over a pond of frogs, right? And so in other words, the frogs actually withhold and stop my ability to reveal my feeling of kingship and grant my rock star status. It's not going to be over frogs, right? But whereas my chesed and my rachamim, I don't care if you're a frog. I can wield these midos at will, and I'm going to bring out my chesed for frogs, right? I'm going to do kindness to a frog. The frog doesn't stop me. But the frog will stop me from tapping into my malchus, because I'm not going to be a king over frogs. And therefore I'm going to just keep my malchus to myself. That's what we're saying, that your other midos are relevant for things that are not at your level, which means even animals. Even though they're at no level of man. Not so malchus. We're saying malchus can only be summoned from an other. Therefore, it matters who that other is. The other, who's going to arouse inside of me my feeling of kingship. And my meaning of kingship is specifically going to be revealed to him. A frog also cannot really know my majesty, right? And so therefore this person is drawing forth my majesty. He's the one who's going to experience my majesty. It has to be specifically on his level. Kingship is only on man and not on animal. Additionally, the person that's going to, there's another credential besides being a man, that's going to have to summon my feeling of malchus, which is that the subject has to be something totally incomparable to me. It's kind of a contradiction. On one, it has to be comparable, it has to be a man, but this man himself has to be a man who's totally incomparable, because I can't, why? I can't bring forth my malchus either on my sons, for example. I can't be a king over either. You can't be a king even if you have 1,000 sons. You're not going to feel like you're majestic over these entities because they're too relatable to you, and there's no way for them to feel such a feeling of subjectiveness and lowliness. The son is a piece of the father, and therefore he's sort of too close, as it were, to summon the feeling of total romamus and exaltedness and majesty. This time the problem is that he's too close. So it has to be a human, which means it's like on his level, but it has to be a human who's really in no way comparable to his level. And that's why actually there's a whole long sugya in Samech Vav, the famous Hemshech of Samech Vav by the Rebbe Rashab, where he explains the level of banim and avadim. Right? We're in the Parsha right now because we say on Rosh Hashanah Yom Kippur, Im kabanim. Right? There's this idea of if Hashem's going to treat us like a son or like a slave. And the idea is each one has something that the other one doesn't have. The son, albeit you can't bring out Hashem's malchus, but on the contrary, you can. The son, it says, has keys and access to all the hidden treasure houses of the king. He can go peeking around into God's mind, and therefore only a son can achieve sort of a real true knowledge of God, because he's sort of made out of what God is made of. It's like the greatest tzaddikim, Rashbi and so forth. They're called the sons. But he says over there, even a son, if he's a real son, he should endeavor to be a servant of of his father as well. In other words, that the son has to raise himself up to becoming the level of a subject. Right? That's where we say im kabanim, im kavadim, right? That even if you're a son, you have to go to the next level and sort of recognize that you're being a son of God is in no comparison to actually reaching the level of being a slave of God, because only a slave of God can pull out Hashem's malchus, which is ultimately the purpose of the whole world. Zeh hayom techilas ma'asecha. What is Rosh Hashanah? It's the day of Zeh, right, where the level of malchus can be brought into the world. You can't do that as Hashem's son. So don't get upset if you're a slave, right? Slaves, again, this is kind of like a weird conversation to just jump into all of a sudden, but I was, you hear a lot of things these days just running around. Judaism, we have slaves, right? Is there something therefore intrinsically flawed with our religion in the sense that we sort of sanction the industry of slavery? And the answer is no, right? We're not gonna skittle out of this and say, well, but that was then and this is now. First of all, we always treat slaves nicely and everything better than your own self. But no, it's a very important aspect, the concept of slave, because the slave gives the master something that the master can't get without him, and therefore the slave is the most precious thing in the entire kingdom. In other words, we are intentionally call ourselves slaves all the time, slaves to Hashem, and therefore there's a concept of being slave to a king. Right? So just like you're God's wife on some cosmic level, you're also Hashem's son on some cosmic level. And guess what? There's such a thing as an actual wife and an actual son, where you live these relationships out as a metaphor for your relationship with God. There's a concept of being a slave. And it's a very, very high level to achieve in life. So much so that in this greatest Hemshech of Chassidus, it says that even if you're the son, you should endeavor to be his slave. Yeah, you had a question?
How can Hashem have malchus over us, and if we have really a piece that is also inside us? Wouldn't it make more sense than the goyim should be
But the thing is that the goyim at this level are compared to animals. Not to be too more controversial, but there's basically this idea, and again, it's for this reason that they don't have mitzvahs, right? The idea of a king is that ultimately he has a realm of subjects who are relevant to following his laws. So why aren't the animals given these laws, right? The laws that are given to goyim are basically like animal laws for animals with brains and sophistication, right? it's not like an insulting thing. If you want to say like a Jew is some kind of a space creature basically that comes here with this unique ability to be commanded in all kinds of things that have nothing to do with this world, nothing to do whatsoever with creation, which means that we are at that level at least fit to be these subjects, right? So no, that's like sort of taking His Majesty too far, where it's not shaykh to be king over the animal kingdom, even the prize of the animal kingdom, right? That's, yeah.
So why don't we say our master our king? Like we say throughout all 10 days of Shiva, our father our king. Shall we say our master our king?
No, it's two things, Avinu, and then there's Malkeinu, right? So there are two levels. You want to reach the level of the father, and then you want to go higher and reach the level of the king, the subject. Same thing, im kabanim, im kavadim. When you say an eved, you're an eved to the melech, right? So it's not one thing. It's two things. Anyway, fine. Controversy reigns. Okay, it is what it is. We don't mean any harm. Masha enkin al banim lo shayach inyan hamalucha. So, again, on children, you cannot have this notion of summoning the feeling of majesty from a king. So it has to be an entity which is, like you said, on par with the melech, like in his domain, a fellow human, but simultaneously not too close of a human. It has to be a subject. Going back, all these things we're explaining why Radla being the source is then the reason for all these other distinctions. And now we got up to the idea of the distinction of revelation, how the revelation comes out. Again, because the source is Radla, it's also going to change the manner of revelation of the Malchus. The Malchus, he bechinas richuk davke. What do we say was unique about the revelation? When it reveals itself as a distant relationship, an infinite chasm between you and the king, which is a relationship, right? As we said before, it's not like an indifference, but it's just a relationship which summons a chasm between you. V'gam inyan zeh. This too, the fact that when this sphera of Malchus comes out, which comes from this level of Radla, this unknowable head, and therefore it creates a feeling of exaltedness and separateness, this too is relevant to the unique nature of Malchus' source in the unknowable head. This is deep. This last sentence, try and work with it for 1 second. Because the notion of being raised up over a people itself comes from being intrinsically raised up. So in other words, what does that mean? There's two levels, first of all, we just sort of opened up here. There's the intrinsic exaltedness of an item or an entity, which is not having to do with its being exalted over something else. Right? You can have a king who's exalted over his people. But that itself is an example of what we're talking about, which is in the source of Radla. There's an exaltedness within God. There's like the essence of God's soul, which can't be known, which its greatness and its exaltedness is not because it's higher than everything else. It's because it's an unknowable point of non-existent essence in Hashem, which is intrinsically exalted. It's not exalted over anybody. There is no anybody, right? But if you want to see that, I want to see the true you, the unknowable head, the point of nothingness. How do I see it? If you want to see that, I will show you an example of that, which is a king. And therefore, I will show you an example of me being exalted over you. And I will create like an infinite distance between you and me. That becomes a metaphor for understanding what true exaltedness is in itself. That it's not exalted over something, it's intrinsic exaltedness. And this is the way that you show it, by showing a king relationship. I want to stop, make sure everyone understands what I just said. So it's like what we were saying before. You repeated me the line, that if you want to reveal this state of nothingness, right, you reveal it as nothingness, right? Whereas if you want to reveal it sort of in its lower form of revelation, it comes out all this light and all this closeness. Remember the 9 lights? But if you want to reveal it as it is, then you reveal a state of nothingness. What's the state of nothingness that comes out? A state of distance, and me feeling like nothing compared to this infinite entity. That's some way I can have access and see a concept of Romamus. But I'm only seeing a small revelation of the real Romamus, which is not that Hashem is a king. It's that he's like intrinsically exalted, period, not exalted above anything. It's just he just goes up and away forever in an unknowable fashion, right? That's just God. If you want to see something of that, I will show you God as king, which means you now are in the picture of having a feeling of never having any access to this king of yours, right? But that's just sort of like his way of offering you a glimpse of his true intrinsic exaltedness. You follow? It's not the easiest thing to understand, but it's like saying basically that B'terem kol yitzur nivra, right? We say in Adon Olam, right? Hashem, what is that? What's the pasuk? Adon Olam Asher Malach, B'terem kol yitzur nivra. What does that mean? He reigned before anything was formed or created, right? That's a type of reign which is not called reigning over a creation, because there's no one to reign over, and he was already king. So there's a level of king. In other words, what do you mean he was king? He obviously wasn't the normal notion of king, because you can't be a king. We just established unless you're king over something. So when we say he was king there, what we're really saying is there's this thing called Reisha de lo Yisyada. There's a level which is the source of the sphere of Malchus inside of Hashem's essence, which reigns before anything even comes to existence. Meaning what? It's God's ability to be never seen, because he is this unknowable head. And anything you're going to see, which is infinity, doesn't even come close to touching him. That's a thing. Now, I want to see it. Well, the problem is, usually when you see it, I'm going to have to show you some form of infinity, because that's what you can see from this thing. This thing alone you cannot see. But if you want to see it, you're pushing to see it, you're going to stand there for a whole day and blow a shofar and try and get it out, I'll show it to you. And it comes out as, I'll be your king. Not a king before there's any creation. I'll be king over creation. And what is this now? I have an experience of this infinite distance. That is Hashem trying to show me something, which is his infinite distance from all potential things. Not even all potential things. It's his intrinsic exaltedness that he can never be known. He shows that he can never be known in an example of being a king that you can never know. So it's like his way of revealing to you that essential state. It comes out as a relationship between king and subject. That is only an example of the essential king, which is not over subjects, because subjects don't even come into the game yet. It's just the unknowable essence of Hashem. The way that we have access to that is by making that come out, and that comes out as Hashem being our king, making an infinite distance between him and us. That's like goggles into the insight that there is such a level. Noam, you getting this? Great. Yeah.
So
You're getting this.
dang.
Somebody's got to get this.
They're
You getting
testing
this?
a second.
Okay.
So you're saying that there's like this this core nothingness.
Yes.
And the way that we experience this core nothingness is through this, like a relationship with the king. It's like you have this feeling of like exaltedness, like I am small and he is like absurd, and
Yes.
I have no idea what it is.
Right. So in a certain
And
sense,
there's
you're
no way to experience that nothingness itself, to like blink out and be in it, or that's just like how it expresses.
That's how God expresses this level of himself. In other words, again, if you're going to experience anything, you're going to take away from it, because you're going to have some experience, and then you're like, you went in from the Reisha de lo Yisyad, you went into the Erech Anpin. You're now having some light. You're now having some experience. So good for you, but you just missed out on the boat of actually tapping into the essential unknowableness of God.
So there's no experience of that.
There is an experience of being subjugated to your king. That's how you experience it. It's like that's how you experience this concept of exaltedness, right? You can't experience exaltedness by having something that you grasp. You have to experience his exaltedness by experiencing something that you don't grasp, which is a king, which is by definition head and shoulders above me, and all I know of you is that I don't know anything about you. That's what a king is, like a rebbe, right? You can have like a relationship, like my rebbe is my father. Great, you're getting some erech anpin love from the rebbe. But if you want to experience the rebbe as melech, your whole thing is, I have no idea what you are, who you are, like how you got into this planet. That's my relationship, and that's like the rebbe showing you a example of the exalted unknowingness of Hashem, only as being a king. Which is why, basically, there are a lot of other rebbes, and they're all giving us lights and infinite lights, you know what I'm saying? But a melech, that's sort of, this is, I started really thinking about it, because there's so many rebbes, and we don't want to diminish anybody. We're not trying to diminish goyim either when we put people in categories and so forth. Chas v'shalom, everything is God's creation. What's unique about the rebbe is that there's only one who can be the king, right? If there's two kings, you got a big problem. You know, that's what's called the split of our nation. It created like the hell that we're in today because we thought we have two kings. No two kings, right? It's like saying there's two gods. God says, Som tasim alecha melech. You have to have a king because if there's two, then maybe I'm a little bit closer to this one. Like one is exalted, the other one's not exalted. He either has this quality inside of him which is bearing the infinite exaltedness of God, or he doesn't, right? So this is the idea of really, this is what the Rebbe brings to the table. There's a lot of Rebbes that are giving us a light, right? The only Rebbe that can give us the absence of light, right, which is really tapping into the essence, is the Melech, whoever the Melech is in the particular generation. And it is generational, because the king has to be the king over the actual people and ruling them. Yeah.
Is it kind of like you know, you can like be at altitude and not really realize, like you can technically be like 12,000 feet up, however that's, you know, measured, and like you can just be like walking around a field and there's nothing really above or below, and you have no actual sense of height.
Right.
But then in order to actually understand how high it is, you actually have to like descend to like sea level to create that. I mean, in geography, it's called like relief, like the actual different like distance between the two things.
Right.
That's kind of what I was thinking when you were talking about that. Like when you're actually operating up at the level of like, I mean, where the king is actually being like the top of the like hypothetical mountain. When you're actually up there, it's all flat. Like you're just there's no sense. You're unable to perceive where that is and where you are if you were to get up there. But once you like drop down to sea level, all of a sudden you're like, that's a 12,000 foot mountain up there.
Yeah.
But you have to kind of like actually separate. You have to create separation.
So you're saying, I think so the analog, I think, is for, if I understand you right, is that when you're up there, it's like God's essential Romamus, which is unknown.
You don't even know you're.
Yeah, it doesn't even know itself.
It's just in a field.
Right. Exactly. And if he wants to reveal this thing, he's got to create this experience of separation. I love that. That's very cool. Anyway, Noam, I don't know if I can do it any better. Just read, and you'll get there. No, but I mean, if you have any particular question, I'm trying to shoot at it, but just general confusion, it's hard for me to. What do you got? General confusion or a question? So you're in the Resha de Lois Yada.
The mist of the morning.
The unknowable head. All right, good enough. So let's try and look inside. Did we finish this paragraph? I believe we did, yes. Okay, so now we're on to chapter 10. Wow, that was probably one of the more difficult paragraphs of Chassidus I think any of you will ever reach in the next 10 minutes for sure. Okay, so chapter 10. Al pi hanal the inyan amalucha hu dafkal mashen kinal banim. We just mentioned a particular point there amongst many other points about the unique quality of the unknowable head and the effect that it has in all the different expressions of Malchus. One of the things we mentioned was that you can be a king only over people and only over a nation, and not on your children, right? It doesn't work that way. Yuvan, from this, more on this point, will understand the Zesh Yisrael hem amo yisbarach yesh b'zeh yisrun al bani matem. This we mentioned in passing, the fact that we are therefore Hashem's people, His nation, is even a greater quality than us being called Banim Atem Lashem Elokechem, that we are His children, which usually we get all excited about the fact that we're God's children in the verse. Here it's more impressive that we're Hashem's subjects. Because only if we get ourselves to the level of being His subjects, then can Hashem be the Melech, and we just established that this Melech is something way, way beyond any other midos. The only way to bring it out is by being a Am, not by being His son, which is basically reaching what you're looking for, Yitzchak. All these wondrous levels of divine revelation, they're coming to you. You are Hashem's child, and therefore you can go back and play in His hidden treasure house and have all the revelations that are available to God. Infinite revelations, they're all yours, but they're all worthless compared to being a subject and experiencing His exaltedness and not experiencing Him. Right? Because that's how you get Hashem's kingship to come out.
Is there any way to do both? Can you coordinate him as a, not?
Yes, that's what we just said. The Frierdiker Rebbe said that even though you should reach the Rebbe Rashab said it in Samech Vav, but the Frierdiker Rebbe actually had to accomplish it because he was the son of the king, and so I believe the whole Samech Vav is kind of talking to his son over there. He's basically you even if you're a son, you have to push yourself to go deeper and reach the level of being a servant, a slave.
You get to play in the treasure house while crowning him as king.
What's that?
You get to play in the treasure house while crowning him as king.
Well, yeah, exactly. I mean, once you crown him as king, you got to get out of his treasure house, because at that level, you realize that as much of as you are a son, you're really not. He's the Rebbe. Like the Frierdiker Rebbe was going to be a Rebbe, right? So he had all the qualities of a Rebbe, but he wasn't the Rebbe yet, and therefore he didn't have this quality of being the king. He had to make himself subjugated to his father. There's kind of a story which indicates this, and since we're out of time, I'll just sort of end on this interesting story. It says that the famous tale that the Alter Rebbe was up studying on the attic, and the Mittler Rebbe, his son, who was at that time not the Rebbe, he was the son of the Rebbe, he was learning downstairs, and he was so engrossed in his studies that what? A baby was in the crib, fell out of the crib, and was crying. And he didn't notice it because he was so deeply engrossed into his studies. What happened? The Alter Rebbe had to come down and put the baby back in the crib. So the Rebbe looks at this story and he points out, don't tell me that the Alter Rebbe wasn't equally involved in his studies. And on the contrary, he was the Rebbe. He was even more involved in his studies. He was more engrossly involved in his studies than his son was. But Dafke, and of course he said the famous line, he says, you can never be so engrossed in your studies that you don't hear the cry of a baby, which is obviously like this deep lesson for all of us for all times, that it's sort of like the crying call of Chabad, like, get yourself out and fix the world. I don't care how holy and how many revelations you want. Get out of your study house and go deal with reality, even though it's going to create a separateness relationship. You're not in as much of a state of devekus, right? And cling to Hashem when you go out and put the baby back in the crib. On the contrary, you have to rip yourself away from this tremendous study. But what did you do? You created a servitude relationship. I'm not here to gain lights and revelation. I'm here to serve you, even if that requires me stripping myself from my lights and revelations to go put the baby in a crib, which is not exactly, a big exciting experience. And yet, the Mittler Rebbe, because he wasn't Rebbe, he couldn't do it. Right? This is the Indian of a king, right? That he understands this notion of distance and that there's a greater connection to Hashem than being in a state of revelation. And so the Rebbe has to come down from the top floor and teach his son why he was a son. Didn't he have all the qualities? No, he was just the son. He wasn't the king yet. And so this sort of deep lesson of recognizing a relationship with Hashem, which is not about revelation. It didn't come into the mind of the son, only in the mind of the king. Interesting idea. Very in line, hopefully, if I brought it out correctly, what I was trying to say with what we're saying here. All right, so we're not going to get too far into this chapter 10, but I can say that we're on the home stretch of the Maimer kind of becoming more comprehensible. So tomorrow is what? Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday. We'll have 3 more days. Is that right? Today's Tuesday. So Wednesday, Thursday. All right, with Hashem's help. We got miracles can happen.
Would you